Right. Looking at the impact of this trade on East Asia, it had some positive benefits for China. Now, China was highly regulated when it came to trade, and they already had strong centralized rule, and so they were able to kind of avoid domination by Europe. And they kind of forced Europe to trade, but on their terms. And so China, remember, they kind of turn inward during this era and turn away from exploration and force Europe to come to them. And so Europe was allowed to trade in China, but really the only thing China wanted from the Europeans was silver. And so tons of silver is going to flood into China. And it's going to be traded for these Chinese luxuries like porcelain and tea and spices. And so China never cuts themselves off. They just highly regulated trade with their country. Japan, on the other hand, at first, Japan allowed trade to continue. And they actually learned from the Europeans. They learned how to manufacture their own guns. But as Japan became more centralized, and I'm going to look at this in more detail later, they also came to distrust these outside ideas and saw them as a threat to the order that they had established. And so Japan is actually going to close themselves off, and they're going to become isolated. And they only leave one port open at Nagasaki, and they allow the Dutch and Chinese to trade there once a year. And so Japan cuts off most of their external trade and highly regulated what little trade they allowed to continue. All right, so when we look at the overall impact of this European exploration and these trade and changes, first off, in Western Europe, we see a huge commercial revolution and a capital revolution. And what we're talking about here is simply an expansion of trade and an expansion of commerce and an increase in capitalism. And so we talked a little bit about mercantilism already. Mercantilism is an economic system where it's highly regulated by the government and trying to generate wealth by exporting more than you import. Capitalism is also an economic system, but it's based on private ownership of businesses. And so when we talk about this capital revolution, what we're talking about really is the expansion of things like our joint stock companies, private companies that come to dominate trade. And so that was a major impact of European exploration. We're going to see new wealth generated in Europe. Many new products and food items are imported to Western Europe as well. We're also going to see an increase in rivalries, conflict over territory and markets. We're going to see wars for colonies expand as well. We're also going to see some social changes. We're going to see new groups of wealthy based not on land ownership, as we've seen throughout most of history. You're wealthy, we're based on land ownership. Well, now I had other ways to generate wealth. And so we see a new class of wealthy aristocracy. We see an increase in cities and urbanization. We see many new products become available in Western Europe. And we see a reduced dependency on agriculture. We're also going to see some intellectual impacts as well. We're going to see European ideas and religions spread to other parts of the world. But we also see Europe borrow foreign ideas if it benefited them. And so when we look at the overall effects on a global scale, all continents were eventually connected by trade. And that's one of the biggest changes that we see in this era is the rise of a truly global trade network. So from America, we have tons of silver and new food items that spread to the rest of the world. We also see a new balance of trade that favored Europe, really for the first time in all of world history. We also see Europeans come to dominate global trade. We see an expansion of unfree labor systems as well. We're also going to see changes in social classes outside of Europe as well. Muslim merchants are going to be replaced, not completely, but at least in part, by European merchants, even within their own territories. We're also going to see the rise of African slave trading states. Some of these kingdoms are going to benefit by trading with Europe for guns and then using those guns to expand their own territory in Africa.